Right. So what we have to do today is of Bays, Amud Bays, and we are up to of Bays Amud Aleph. So yesterday we pointed out two stories. I just wanted to mention a little bit more now on a little bit about. One was we said about the fact that the there was a prison guard who was Roy for Olam Haba, and two was about the Bat Chanim who were Roy for Olam Haba. So about the prison guard, the Gemara says that he dressed like a guy. And I mentioned the Gemara Mili Zion about a Reuven Esther Burley who was Misaper Kumi, who got sort of a Geisha haircut to be able to fit in, and again, to be helping the Jews. So the same is true over here with these two guys. The Gemara says that they asked him, this prison guard, why was he wearing the Masani Uchim? Why was he wearing sort of these black shoes? It was whatever Geisha looking shoes. And why wasn't he, wearing the Tchilta? So I mentioned that this was to blend in, as the Gemara says, but the word Techilta, which is a reference to Tchelas, and was certainly not a reference to Tchelas in the eyes of the Rishon. Both the Rashi, the Rabbeinu Chananel, and Rabbeinu Gershom all say that Techilta means tzitzis. And if you think about it, assuming that they wore their tzitzis on their begadim then, not a separate beged for it, so then, what's the difference if Tchelis or Lavan and the guy's wearing fringes on his beged? Obviously, he's a Jew. So, and for I think the Gemara's mind, that maybe it was just called Tchilta as a reference to tzitzis, but clearly whether it was white strings or blue strings, wouldn't have made a difference. So that's one point. Second is that they didn't mention anything like why is he not wearing tefillin? If they were wearing tefillin all day in those days. Obviously, again, he couldn't be wearing tefillin for the same obvious reason that it would be clear then that he was a Jew. That's number one. Number two, we mentioned about these Bat Chanim, and we said that these Bat Chanim are going to Gan Eden. Why? Because they make people happy. And we learned that people who are Leitzim, they're going to Gehenim, the Mishnah tells us in Amos. So, Kol HaMesleitzes, the Sefer Gehenim, it's not so ideal. So obviously, what we have to say is the difference between making somebody happy, who's down, versus making fun of people that serves no purpose other than to be elites. And clearly, that's how you have to play it out. Because, for example, look at the Gemara that we've mentioned before. Gemara in Brachas on Lamed Amud Beis. The Gemara over there says that the people who seemingly were too happy, and so their students said, how could you be so seemingly full of levity? How could you be so seemingly, lightheaded? And the response was, "Come on, tefillin." No, no, I'm wearing tefillin, meaning I'm not too full of levity. Also, it's actually funny. The more Brachas Lamed also Shabbos, the more Lamed tells us that Rebbe, when he would open up his shir, he was always mindful of Mila de B'difusa. He would always make a joke, get the people excited, get the people into the shir. He would make a joke. Is that a situation of Litzanis? Obviously not. The the issue is really what is the purpose? If the purpose is to raise people up, if the purpose is to get people into the share, that's called purposeful joking. That's not bringing people down. That's making jokes or whatever, some sort of humor to raise people up. In that situation, that's what we're seeing here in our Gemara about the Bat Chanim who are going to heaven. But if the whole idea of the joke is to bring people down, to make light of people, to make light of situations, so then one is clearly a late. Moshe Leitzim Loyava, a person shouldn't be hanging out with them. The Maril writes in his customs of the Jewish people, she talks there about in the Aseres Mei Tshuva. So the Maril says that no late tzanis during Aseres Mei Tshuva. Of course not. Right? It's a very special time. It's serious days. One shouldn't be, in general, making frivolity, but especially during that Aseres Mei Tshuva. But of course, as he points out, if you're at a situation, let's say you're at a chasana, right? You're trying to make people happy, the chasan kala, etc. So that's not an issue. There's no problem there because again, as we just said, the difference between purposeful and everything has a purpose, but purposeful meaning you're raising people up versus purposeful of making a living by making fun of people because again, being a big comedian, they're not the same thing necessarily. So in the question of can somebody be a Jewish comedian? Is it permitted halachically? Yeah, there's no isser in it. Again, if you're going to be raising people up, if the act is effectively maybe you're going to say you can't be that funny. I understand that's the problem. I once heard from a comedian a very very odd story. A guy the he was Megaya Reform conservative and then Orthodox. So he says it's not his first joke was about toughest dumb breast. It was quite funny, but was he making fun of anybody? No, he was making fun of his situation about how he became from her and from her. And it was very cute. It was not. I don't think the situation of like John was raising people up, was making a living for himself. So yeah, such a situation obviously is not going to be a problem. That will be a problem a lot closer to the inshe beducha and on these people who were going around trying to lift people up, as the Gemara says, anan midvadchinan atzivi, right? We raise up those people that are sad, and that's what we do. All right, so start out today. We're at the two dots. We're at the two dots about halfway down on Chaf Beis Amud Aleph. So says the Gemara, Al Elu Masriyin B'chol Makom. Oh no, I'm sorry, we did that yesterday, but we'll just run through it again today. It's going to be relevant again. Tana Rabban Al Elu Masriyin B'chol Makom, Al Shidafim V'al Yirokim V'al Arba V'chasil V'al Chaya Ra. So on these things we are Masriya B'chol Makom. There's a danger that whatever was seen is going to spread. What are the examples? We said this kind of blight in the fields and also locusts and also wild animals. Even a little bit. What is a little bit? Right? So in Shidaf and Irakim is even a little bit. The Mishnah had said like a pitanor, which means a very small amount. That's what Rashi says over here. Moli Tana de Masnisim, Rashi says, maybe this was maybe it was an example in the Mishnah of a story about that, but the basic point that it's trying to get across, it's a very small amount. Even a de minimis amount, a tiny amount, is enough to say, oh, there's a big danger that this could spread. And the Arba V'chasil, I feel like near Be'eretz Shal Knaf Echad Masrin Alei. Fine, even in like one the grasshopper or this locust would be enough. The Mishnah had said one of the things that is a situation where you're masriyan is on a chaya ra. What is the situation of a chaya ra? So the Gemara says chaya ra she'amru b'zman shehi mishulachas masriyan olel. Eina mishulachas ein masriyan olel. If it's a wild animal that was sent Mishulachas, like the pasuk says in the Torah, Mishilachti, right? Mishilachti is chaya ra, right? It's Mishulachas. It's meaning the Rashi says over here, Mishulachas min hashamayim. Heaven is sending this animal to you. So in that situation, Masrin then you're going to make an emergency, sound the emergency bell everywhere. The Eina Mishulachas, if it's not sent from heaven, the Ein Masrin Oleh. So one wants to know, Ezi Mishulachas, Ve'ezu She'ena Mishulachas. So how do you differentiate when it's sent by heaven, when it's not sent by heaven? So the more tries to explain as follows. Nearest Be'ir, right, this is what the Bride says. Nearest Be'ir, if it's this animal, these wild animals we've seen in the city, now obviously the normal place for a wild animal is in the open, right, in the fields, in the woodlands, in the marshes. It's not normal to see the wild animal in the city. So nearest be'er mishulachas, and obviously it's sent mishamayim. Besada ena mishulachas. B'yayim, if the animal is seen by day, obviously the animals like to hide by day. They like to, they're gonna wait till they can, have more advantage to be able to hide and spring on their unsuspecting prey. That would be at nighttime. So then mishulachas. Balayla ain't a mishulachas. If it sees two people and still runs after two people, which normally you would expect to be scared, so mishulachas. Nichbeis, on the side says barucha. If it's hiding from them or running away from them, then obviously it's not mishulachas. If it ripped apart two people and ate one of them, then that's considered mishulachas. That was sent by heaven. If it ate both of them, it's not considered mishulachas. Why not? Because I was very hungry. Taisus here points out, the bottom of Taisus, Taisus says, this is a riboy. In other words, if it killed two people and it ate them, that's considered not mishulachas. Why? Because it's hungry. And if it killed two people and only ate one of them, or as Taisus is pointing out, it didn't eat any of them, so then in that situation, it's considered what? Not mishulachas. Why? Because why did it kill it? It should only have killed it if it was hungry. If it killed the human and just let it there, then that would we consider that mishulachas. Right? That would mean, so if it killed two and ate two, it's hungry. If it killed two and ate none, that's mishulachas. If it killed two and only ate one, it's still considered mishulachas. That's Taisus' point here. I think more is a riboy. More saying it killed one. Sorry, it killed two and ate one. That's mishulachas. And of course, if it killed two and ate none of them, it's mishulachas. Obviously. Yeah. So continues the Gemara. So mishul, yeah. So tarfish nebedan v'achal echal mehem mishulachas. Achal shneyen ene mishulachas. Also, the gag menatol tinek me'arisa. If it went up to the roof and took a child down from the roof, that would be considered mishulachas. Another one wants to go through and ask some questions on this. Rashi points out, number one, on the gagos of those days, so that they were not like we had, well, not today necessarily, because today there's different kinds of roofs, but in those days, their roofs were much flatter. They could do a lot of activities in it. They would go sit on the roof, they would eat on the roof, they would put the laundry on the roof. They did a lot of things on the roof. The roof was like a floor that they used. It wasn't like slanty where you couldn't stand on it. So that's how you can keep a baby on the roof. It's not like a child abuse, you know what I mean? All right. Just want to point out one thing before we go any further in the Gemara is that there's a famous Orach Chaim in Parshas Vayeshev. The Orach Chaim talks about the difference between a human being killing another human being versus an animal killing a human being. So the Orach Chaim says a human being is a Baal B'chira. A human being is a Baal B'chira. And he says like I said, it's a famous Orach Chaim because he has a line there that's an unbelievable line. It says the Orach Chaim, if a person X decides to kill Y, it doesn't necessarily mean that in heaven they were going to that Y is going to die. You have Bechira. And even if Y wasn't Gazim and Shemayim to die, you have the ability to go, as it were, and kill him. Even if it wasn't so decreed in heaven. Let's put that on the side. Well, he says an animal doesn't have that ability. An animal only has the ability to kill if it's decreed min hashamayim. So I ask you then, how does this fit with this Gemara? If this Gemara is saying that it's mishulachas, meaning min hashamayim it's sent, and then we're saying that if it was eating these two human beings, then it's not mishulachas. It's doing it because it's very hungry. So then it's not mishulachas, and it's not sent by heaven. So to answer this Orach Chaim, I think you have to say as follows. I think you have to say that the Orach Chaim means, of course, if it's a situation where the animal is killing because he's starving, he's not saying that situation is that situation is not to keep by heaven. It's irrelevant. The animal's hungry. It's coming mitzad the animal to sate his hunger. That's why he's eating. And so the whole distinction, what we would have to then say is a human being can kill another human being. He's a Baal B'chira. He can go even without heaven being geyser. An animal, if the animal is killing not mitzad, it's hunger. It's killing mitzad the fact that it is angry. It is trying to show its dominance, whatever the reasons are the animals kill, that will only happen if it's examined Hashemayim. But if an animal's killing mitzad, the fact that it's starving, so then again we would have to say for the Archaim, based upon this Gemara, that over there also he's not saying that the situation is somebody, a person who is a kibbutz happened to die. It's coming not mitzad the animal, coming mitzad the fact that the animal is hungry. It's not mitzad the das of the animal choosing to kill this person. That's the only way I can sort of make it make sense. All right, so then the Gemara asks a question. The Gemara's question is that if you look at this brisa, it sounds like there's a little bit of some steers here. It says the Mahagufa Kasha. Amris nirasa be'ir mishulachas. It's mashma that what if the animal is in the middle of the city, that's being sent min shamayim. And when is it that the animal is being found in the city? It's mashma that doesn't make a difference. As long as the animal's in the city, it doesn't make a difference if it's daytime or it's nighttime. So long as the animal's in the city, that's considered mishulachas, right? An animal in the city is not a known place of habitat for the animal, so obviously it's sent by heaven. The Hadar Amres, and then later on in the Brisa you said, and yet you said that during the day it's considered mishulachas, but balayla, then it's not considered mishulachas, because by night it's this normal thing to be going around and going to attack. So that's the Gemara like Kash. It's not a stira. Haki Kamar, this you have to explain it. Nirasa be'ir be'yoim mishulachas. If it's found by day in the city, that's min hashamayim, because that's not normal for the animal to be found by day roaming a city. Be'ir balayla ena mishulachas. But to be found in the city at night, that's not considered mishulachas from shamayim. Why? Because that's what animals do. Right? They say in these safari camps or whatever, these places that are built in the deserts, the Sahara, whatever they put these hotels, then sometimes you find the animals roaming in them. I'm not sure if that's a situation of mishulachas or not mishulachas, because how could you say it's mishulachas if you built your habitat, your little hotel, in the middle of the safari? What do you expect? Right. So this is not the obvious. This is if you have an animal that escapes the zoo and running around the city, it's not obviously what we're talking about. In a situation where you have a little village, in those days, you have a little town, and you have animals roaming around the grasslands, the woodlands, the marshes around by. So for them to walk into the city by day, it's not normal. That's not the regular place they would hang out. Coming there by night, maybe so. Maybe that is more normal. So that's the Gemara is trying to make a distinction. We're not talking about having a lion walking through Manhattan. So that's obviously not relevant to our situation here. It says the Gemara. So if it's a situation by day in the city, so that's considered min hashamayim, because really the animal shouldn't be there. Be'ir balayla ena mishulachas. But if it's in the city by night, that's not considered mishulachas, because then you would expect the animal, might be roaming and checking out to see what he can find there. He doesn't expect to come across any human beings there at night. Inami, and the other option is besada, in the field, right? Look, it's the animal's place, right? The animal by day is roaming around sometimes. So it doesn't. Not all the animals are like the lions and sitting there by day and resting, right? Sometimes they're attacking, etc. So that's not considered mishulachas because it's natural habitat. You can't say that it's not. It's not mishulachas. It's its normal situation. However, by night, besada balayla ain't mishulachas, and obviously by night in the field, in my Gemara it takes that, puts in parentheses, but obviously over there, you're not going to say it's min hashamayim, that either you can't really learn into that, because again, that would be normal for the animal to do. The point is that in the field, in the marsh, in the woodland, and wherever the animal's normal place to be, you're not going to argue it's mishulachas. But in the city, that is mishulachas. At night, though, it's not mishulachas, because that would not be normal for the animal to be there. But in a city that is by day having an animal, so that we would say is a situation of mishulachas. And that's the answer of the steer. Again, another steer is rasa shnei be'onim rasa sacharei mishulachas. We said that if it runs after two people, that's considered mishulachas. That's the mashma says that if it wasn't running, let's say just stood there, so that would be ena mishulachas. The harder amers nich besim then ena mishulachas. And then you said that if it was hiding from them or ran away from them, So that's not considered mishulachas, but that's mashma ha'imedus mishulachas. As much if it stood at the ground, didn't move, that would be considered that it was sent min hashamayim. So the steer is the mashma says, what is imedus? What is the situation of imedus? Imedus can either be mashma that it's mishulachas, or it can be mashma it's not mishulachas. Which one is it? Or it says again the same point, like kasha, kamasaras b'chlagam, kamasaras shenis b'chlagam. The question of was it near the agam, right? Was it near the marsh? Was it near the woodland? Was it near the area where the animal normal habitat is? If it's near where the animal's habitat is, so the fact that it's standing in one place and not moving, so what's the big raya? Besoras b'chlagam is ain't a mishulachas. Why? Because it could always run into the woodland and it'll get away. So it's not a raya. But if it's standing its ground far away from its natural habitat, it's not smuch la'agam, so then that will be a situation. We would consider that mishulachas. We would consider that minashamai because it's very odd. Again, we're not talking about animals with rabies or things like this, right? Where an animal will be acting in a way that will be abnormal. We're talking about a regular animal that's acting in an abnormal way. Right. Again, we're not talking about, like I say, cities like Manhattan or the safaris in South Africa. Like this is not talking about a normal situation or normal situation of those days where you have mostly common wild lands and you have a city here, a little pocket, a village, or things like that. That's all. That's the kind of example that we are getting at here. Yeah. So says the Gemara. So the last case is Torfa Shnei Bnei Adam Ke'echad Ve'achla Echad Mehem Mishulachas. What happens if the animal tore into two people, right? But it only ate one of them. So then we say that's a Mishulachas. And as Tesis points out, that's a riboy. If it ate none of them, of course it's Mishulachas. But Shneim, if it ate both of them, that's ain't a Mishulachas. That's not considered Mishulachas, right? Because it was hungry. Says the Gemara, Amris, Afilu Ratzasa. But didn't you just point out that if the animal merely ran after, right? If it ran after the people, that's already considered Mishulachas. So now you're saying that Imam ate them or ate one of them, and that's not Mishulachas? Right? If it ran after them, that's already Mishulachas. So obviously if it ate them, it should be Mishulachas. So how could you say that if it ate them, it's not Mishulachas? So again, Amar Papa Kitana Hi Be'agma. What are we saying that the situation about if it's eating how many it ate, if it's mishulachas or not mishulachas, and yet we said by running it's mishulachas. So the Gemara says the difference is between whether or not we're talking about an agam or not an agam. In other words, if you're talking about in its actual habitat, you're in the animal's habitat. So the animal ate you, and then it leaves you on, the animal ate the people. It didn't and left over, one of the people didn't eat both of them. So as Rashi says, Kitanya he the achla and ratzasa loy. Right, that's talking about in the agam. That's talking about in the actual woodland, in the marshland. Why the cave and the hainu duchta samcha that the berata basrael, because it's normal place. So it ran after them and therefore was eating them, and you can't really learn too much, sort of more into that. But if we're in a situation where it's not in the agam, it's not in the woodland, it's not in the marshland, and it's merely running after them, so that's already mishulachas. But you don't expect that if you're in the animal's own habitat, that it's going to necessarily act in the same way that it would act in the middle of the city or in somewhere that's not its natural habitat. So if you're in its natural habitat and it ate, but it didn't eat everybody left over on the side, so then we're going to say that is mishulachas because that's very odd. Normally the animal would eat if it's hungry, and if it's not hungry, it wouldn't be eating, it wouldn't be killing. And therefore, if it ate, it's going to be ro'ev, it's going to be hungry, it's not considered mishulachas. But if it's not hungry, then it shouldn't have killed, and therefore we would consider it mishulachas. So that answers up sort of the steers, but again, the basic premise of this entire Gemara is if the animal is not acting in its normative way, as we would expect, again, we're not talking about a sick animal, crazy animal, we're talking about just a regular animal not acting in its normal way, then we would consider that mishulachas. If the animal is acting in its normal way, when it's hungry, it kills, it eats, then we would not consider that mishulachas. Again, as we said, for the Arachaim, we would have to make the argument that Archaim, when he says that an animal is not a Baal Bechira, and therefore when he kills, he's only killing what already having decreed to be killed. And this Gemara is saying that if it's killing and eating, that it's not Mishulachas, the only way I think the answer of the Archaim is that the Archaim would have to make the distinction as well and say when an animal is killing, not necessarily to eat. That's what he means when he says that the animal doesn't have Baal Bechira, and therefore it's killing because Menashemayim was good for them to be killed. But the animal's killing just because it's hungry, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it was decreed by heaven that this person had to die. He's hungry. Whatever he found, he's what he's eating. I think so. I'm not 100% sure, but I don't see that Archaim deals with this Gemara here. Okay. Fine. So the Gemara then says that the next case was if the kid is taken out of its cradle on the roof. Pshita says the Gemara, obviously an animal climbing up to a roof, it's a very abnormal thing. Obviously it's sent min shemayim. We're talking about like not a regular roof in the middle of a city. We're talking about like Rashi says, some sort of a hunter, hut that he has in the, where hunters hunt. Rashi says they were hunting for birds. I'm not sure why specifically birds, but presumably any hunter's hideout that he has a little hut. So over there, there was, I guess, a roof, and there was a baby on the roof. So for an animal to go climb on it, that was considered very odd. Again, we go back to the question of, right, but if it's not a normal roof in the middle of a town, but it's a hunter's hideout, which is presumably then more in the forest, in the lair, he's in the animal's lair, he's in the animal's area. So then why is it so abnormal for the animal to climb? Again, I'm not 100% clear, but the idea of it being it's a somewhat abnormal situation in the sense that the animal's climbing, but obviously it can't be literally in the middle of the animal's habitat where you would expect that the animals climb, or like it's not 100% clear to me exactly how to make that in between case, but that's clearly what we have to suggest is that it was abnormal enough that the animal climbed that we can consider Menashemayim, that's Mishulachas, and on the other hand, the situation to have it in in the middle of the city would be so out of bounds. In other words, when I'm looking at this Gemara, I say to myself, why do we mamish have to run all the way over there? Why is it so pashut? The Gemara is saying it's so pashut. In the middle of a city for an animal to climb on a roof and eat a baby, that's such a pashtus that I don't need you to tell me that. So I have to take the case out and now put the animal in climbing on a roof in the middle of the forest. Okay, but if it's the middle of the forest, then it's normal for the animals to climb. Why is it so abnormal then? So you have to say, okay, but it's the kind of a house where it wouldn't necessarily climb it, but it's in its hideout, so it would climb. Okay. But this is where we are forced to get to because the more I thought it was too much of a davar pashut to say that the house was mamish in the middle of a city. Okay, Zot the Gemara. So now we get back, and it happens to be very, very timely. We're literally going to be saying this over in a few weeks, right? This is one of the very sad, right, kinnis that we say on Tisha B'Av, Vayikran Yirmiyahu, Al Yeshua Melech. I think it's Yudayin. He was an unbelievable king. He literally was causing tshuva to be done by the Jewish people. Unbelievable tshuva. He had found the Sefer Devarim in the Beis Hamikdash, and he had it read, and he had everybody follow the laws. There was Chizkiyahu had done a tshuva revolution, and then the people, went back to idolatry by Menashe. And then later on, you have again the last chance to save the Jews. Yeshua, again, as the youth tshuva, has the people, get back to it. But as the Gemara says, what he didn't chap was that people weren't so holy that they were removing all avodah zaros from the land, but they had avodah zaros in their doors. When you would open the doors, you wouldn't see the avodah zarah. When the doors were closed, the doors would come together. Then all of a sudden, it would be like in the shape of the avodah zarah. And so the people would be able to hide it essentially from the king and his mashgichim and his police officers, but not able to totally eradicate it. But Yeshua didn't realize that. He thought that that he had reached a level where the people were high on their benisham. They were very close to Hashem. And so therefore he interprets a pasuk in Parshas B'Chukai. The pasuk says, V'nosati shalom ba'aretz u'shraftem ve'ein macharit. I'm going to give you peace in the land. You're going to have no sword that's going to pass through your lands. Remember, the Mishnah said, "Al hacherev," if there's a sword that's passing through your land, so the halacha is that that's one of the things that you're masriyan on. That's one of the big dangers that you're going to go make a fast and go sound the alarm. The Gemara says, "Tana Rabban hacherev she'amru ein itzaref le'em hacherev she'en shal shalom." Obviously, we're not talking about a situation of an army that's marching through to attack you. Of course, in that situation, you're masriyan. Like that's not a chiddush. I don't need the Mishnah to tell you that. Elafil cherev shal shalayim, even if it will be a cherev of peace, even if an army is passing through your land, not to attack you, but to attack another land, that's what it means. V'cherev lo yisaver ba'artzach. It means that nobody's going to pass in your land, not even somebody who has no designs against you. They're not going to be allowed to pass through your land. She'en lecha cherev shal shalom yesim and par nachai, v'af al pi nechshel ba'amelch yeshio. Right, Paranachah, the leader of Egypt, had no designs against Yeshua in that time. I remember sometimes the Jews were subservient to Asher, sometimes subservient to Babel, sometimes subservient to Mitzrayim. At that time, Paran says, "I'm not interested in you right now. I'll deal with you at another point if I have an issue with you. My issue is another enemy that I have." And Yeshua thought that he shouldn't pass through because the Jews were holy. So they're living the time not of the time of the bracha the empire of and it says when you're going to have peace in the land, no enemy is going to pass through your land, even if the enemy is not coming after you. It's just not you. Nobody's supposed to pass through the land. So the Gemara says, Shenemar, the pasuk says, "Turn out Chabeitim and Beis, Vayishlach Elav Malachim Leimor." Parai Nechai sent a message to Yeshua, and he said, "Mali v'loch Malach Yehuda, why are you trying to hold me back? I'm not coming after you today. I'm going after the house that I'm going to fight with. It's not you. And I have God on my side who's telling me who's going to help me destroy this enemy of mine. Stop starting up with me, because the God that's with me is going to help me, or if not, I'll destroy you." That's the message that Parnachai sends to Yeshua. So the Gemara asks, what is God that he's talking about? He's referencing God. Right? And obviously, I'm not saying Elohim, so I'm giving it away. He's obviously referencing his Avodah Zarah, says the Mamar Vid Marav. Avodah Zarah, the Elohim that's mentioned here is Va'avdu Elohim Acherim. It's not talking about the Avodah Zarah. It's not talking about the Rebbeinu Shalom. Amar Ha'il v'kabadak ba'Avodah Zarah yechilnalei. So Yeshua learns from this. He's batach in his avodah zarah. He believes in his getchkas. So Yeshua was convinced 100% that he's going to be able to beat him. He was not worried. Yeshua thought that he's going to be able to vanquish him because he is an avodah zarah worshiper, but his confidence is in his avodah zarah. Of course, that wasn't to be. As I just mentioned before, Yeshua was wrong about the status of the Jews. They were nowhere near as holy as he had hoped, as he thought. So why the pasuk end up there, very famous. The pasuk tells us, "V'yeru hayer melech Yeshua." He was mamish. They aimed at him. They were able to tell who he was, right? Because oftentimes the king had a special chariot or special horses, right? In the books, if you read the history about George Washington, and he was not just like a superimposing tall person, like well over 6 feet tall. And at that time, the average height was like under 5'6", 5'6", 5'7", like that was the average height. He was like 6'3", 6'4", was a very big guy. But he also rode a very big horse, right? And he would insist on going out to the battles, right? And so people would see him, and they would aim at him, and he would just miraculously just not get hit, or if his horse got hit, he got up and moved on to the next horse, like unbelievable, right? So here, they would. Why would they aim at him? Because you get George Washington off his horse, you get him down. Imagine what that does to the whole army, right? Remember, right? The pasuk says by Moshe Rabbeinu when they're fighting Amalek, before Tomkum Yadav Mizeh Echad Mizeh Echad. Right? It was like people saw Moshe, let's keep on fighting. Right? It's obviously the mission of Shana that they had confidence in Hashem. But I'm saying just as a practical matter, if George Washington is striding around the battlefield on a big horse, and everyone sees him. It's like they're inspired. If he's knocked off the horse, he's not on the battlefield, then all of a sudden, it takes out the wind out of the army. So what would they do with the British? They would aim at George Washington, try to get him off. The same was true with Yeshio. The Para Nechai wants to go after Yeshio. He wants to get him off the horse. He wants to get him down. As he get him down, the Israeli army is going to lose its hope. And that's what they did. He says, take me out of the battlefield. I am dying. What does it mean? I'm very hurt. I'm Rabbi Marav. Right? His mom's like a sieve. Is like they shot, according to the kinnis, we say like 300 arrows. Mama, he's bleeding to death. Amar Shmuel ben Achman and Rabbi Yonasan, they changed it from the side here. Rabbi Yonasan, they man and Sheshio, he should have asked advice from Yirmiyahu Melech, and he did not. Right? Remember that was his four-beer Chizkiyahu's problem. Also, the more brachas Yod that he should have been asking from advice Chizkiyahu from Yeshaya, and he didn't. Again, the same kind of an idea. So what the more wants to understand, what did Yirmiyahu think? I'm sorry, what did Yeshayahu think? My darash, what was his drasha? How does he understand that Parnachai shouldn't be allowed? Because he learned the pasuk the Cherev l'Sava Bartzachem. My Cherev, what was the Cherev that we're talking about? Ilim Cherev Shein Shol Shalom. If we're talking about a Cherev that's coming for war, obviously it doesn't mean that, because it's saying it's going to be peace in the land. So what does it mean Cherev l'Sava Bartzachem? Afilu Shol Shalom, even a Cherev of Shalom shouldn't be passing through the land. But he did not realize that his generation was really not worthy in the way that he thought. Yeah, but when he was dying, so Yirmiyahu saw that he was moving his lips. Maybe he's saying things against the Rebbeinu Shalom because of the fact that he's in so much pain. So nevertheless, he decided to listen. He put his ears to Yeshua's mouth to hear what he was saying, and he saw that he was being mastik the din. Amar tzadik hu Hashem kifi marisi. I rebelled against Hashem. I didn't do what Hashem had wanted. Of course, this becomes a famous line in Eicha, and then Yirmiyahu, by Yirmiyahu Yeshio, so we have a source of that in Eicha as well. Pasuk aleh hishaita ruach hapenu Mashiach Hashem. Pasuk says, I believe look at Rashi in Eicha, we're talking here about Yeshio HaMelech, ruach hapenu Mashiach Hashem, right? The Mashiach Hashem is a reference to Yeshio HaMelech. So again, our point of this Gemara was the idea that when we are Masriyan, is of course if it's a cherev that's coming to hurt, obviously. But even a cherev shel shalom or Masriyan, even that's dangerous. If somebody just wants to pass through the land, that already is excuse enough to be Masriyan, to be sounding the alarm. Yeah. I don't know that would mean necessarily to fight. Like nowadays, like after Yesha, I'm not sure that that's what the Gemara is trying to say. Just as Masriyan, it's a dangerous situation. Everybody should be on alert. Everybody should be davening, fasting, etc. Fine. So the Gemara, we have a couple minutes. Let's just run through the next piece over here. So the Gemara says, "Ma'isa of Yerushalayim le'areim." Right, the Zakanim went down. Right, remember they saw this amount of shidafa in Ashkelon, a small amount, but it was enough to call a tainus everywhere. So the Gemara says, "Ibaylu kimoli taner tavua adilma kimoli taner pas." Right. Does it mean when we say filling up a tanner with wheat, or does it mean filling up a tanner with bread? What's the difference? So in those ovens that they had in those days, we also have it nowadays. Maybe you've seen it before. They have ovens where you put the bread. Come in. You put the bread on the side of the oven. You know what I mean? Have you seen that? Right? When you go to get a pita, they don't put the pita in the oven. They slap it on the side of the oven. The side of the oven, that is the way they bake it. That's how they used to bake in those days. So the Gemara is saying that if we're talking about putting in tavua in the oven, that's going to fill up the whole oven. That's a lot of tavua. But putting bread on the sides of the oven, that's very little, right? Because that's going to, a few breads is going to be sufficient to be able to take up the space of the whole oven. So the Gemara says, what did the Mishnah said? The Mishnah said, like the mouth of the oven. So obviously it's a much smaller amount. And therefore, it's a much smaller amount. We obviously talking about bread and not talking about tavua. But the Gemara says, I can still ask you a question. Are you talking about like putting it literally the bread on top of the mouth of the oven, like the exhaust pipe, or we mean putting it around the mouth of the oven? And the Gemara says teku. So wonderful questions. No idea. Right? So the Gemara doesn't know 100%. So it goes with Taanit Asher Achos the Avim. Another line of the Mishnah was that they once, there were guys with Taanit when they had to move the 8 kids. Amar Ulam Shem Rav Shimon Yatzadik. Ma'asu Bol the Avim Shnei Naikais. They had once a story where these wolves ate 2 little kids, and they excreted them. And they said the basar was not tamei, but the atzames were. Why? Because the basar was nisakal b'meyav of the ze'evim. So then it's just re'eh. It's just gulalim of the ze'ev. So that's not tamei. But the bones that came out, so obviously that wasn't nisakal b'meyav shel ze'ev. So that would be then considered a human bone, and that would be considered tamei. We have to stop over here.